I made crochet versions of like.
Yeah, you showed me.
Here we go.
And like, that was.
Alrighty.
In the past.
Alrighty, everyone. Let's get started. So, some announcements. This weekend is Pancakes and Pontification, our monthly meeting. It's on October 7th. It's going to be at 1305 Preston Road at the Denny's at the corner of Plano Parkway and Preston, where it normally is. And again, place that if you have any theological questions, any kind of hard questions, any kind of just curious questions, it's a place where we just have some really interesting discussion on really any topic under the sun that's apologetics, theology related, anything like that. It's a real fun time, and of course there will be Denny's and pancakes and whatever else you want to get. Additionally, we are thinking about getting a new shirt and a new shirt design. But the question is, what kind of design are we going to have on that shirt? So we are thinking that we're going to let anyone who wants to design a t-shirt to help design us that, and to be able to submit some kind of design, kind of using just the general kind of idea of like our blues and pinks and purple kind of vibe to it, just to make really any kind of Reasonable Faith design with the Reasonable Faith logo in order to go on a new generation of shirts. And we would probably have a vote on it sometime before Thanksgiving break. So, just wanted to announce that. We're still kind of getting things worked out, but
There'll be more stuff on the Discord whenever that's ready.
Yeah, there should be like a Discord being made pretty soon, a channel on the Discord for discussion about that. So yeah, hopefully anyone who wants to, or anyone who knows anything about graphic design or anything and would like to,
Not us.
would like to design something for Reasonable Faith, you have the chance to get to have your design be our next shirt that will probably exist for a good 1 to 2 years. So.
The channel is made.
What? Oh, the channel's made? Okay, the channel is up then. Yeah. Alrighty. And now tonight we have Beau Bishop.
All right.
So I was thinking about that.
Yeah,
I'll let
no
you come
worries.
up here and introduce yourself to the group.
Yep. Thanks, guys. Happy to be here. I've been coming to this chapter, of course, lots of new faces, but probably, I don't know how long, years. It's been a number of years. So
Pretty
I've
much
definitely,
since the beginning,
Yeah.
not too long afterwards anyway.
yeah, so Alan and I go way back. My background, so studied computer science, coded for about a year, decided, nope, not for me, and got into more professional sales type organizations. I co-founded a engineering services and staffing firm in 2009 called the Ranger Group. We're headquartered in Frisco. Let's see, apologetics related, had an opportunity to help with Reasonable Faith, the original Dallas chapter, and then for a season was a executive director of the ministry and sat on the board with Alan for a few years. So did that for a while. What are you laughing at back there? Okay. Brought my two sons with me tonight. Got two at home as well with mom. So married to Amy, father of 4. So I am also very interested in all things philosophy of mind. That got me into neuroscience, and then that also got me into the study of near-death experiences, because everyone asked me about that anytime I ever talked about consciousness and the non-physical nature of consciousness. This topic came up, so I originally thought, oh, this is sort of just kooky stories, and was a little skeptical of this whole area, but since changed my mind quite a bit. So we'll go through some of that, and I'm also very interested in AI, so we're doing some stuff at work, and in addition, Alan is too, related to AI. But we're going to start here. I thought I would show this real quick because it's a cool little intro to the topic tonight.
It was 1969, the beautiful day to fly. We were about 100 feet above the ground when I started noticing that something was wrong. It was an engine failure. Trees were filling our windshield. found myself above the crash signs. And while I'm processing what I'm looking at, I can see a pilot, and this is me.
No two near-death experiences are the same.
Out of nowhere, a trailer truck hit me head on. But
They typically occur in a very consistent process.
We began to go down the river, and my boat became pinned. I was drowning.
The first thing that happens is called an out-of-body experience.
And they come to a place of exquisite beauty.
I very commonly see a life, deceased relatives come to meet them. The first person I saw was my grandfather. Now I'm traveling like a rocket ship, straight upwards, and with that.
Oh my God, I'm alive. But not every near-death experience is a good one. 23% had hellish experiences. I saw a black tunnel. I was just falling.
I wasn't in fear, I was in terror.
It was just darkness.
Put me back. I don't belong here.
I heard a voice before I woke up. You still have a purpose on earth.
I was very skeptical.
I never felt alive and then dead. I felt alive and then more alive.
I had full brain recordings from the dying human brain. Even though they were unconscious, they were able to give corroborative evidence.
She's describing something she just shouldn't know. See, right?
You can't be mystified by that question. What happens after you die?
This really does show that there is life after death.
So this comes out this month.
Great timing.
Good timing. So here's a question that I have for you. As materialism, this is a philosophy that you could also insert, later I'm going to say physicalism. I'm kind of using those interchangeably. There's slight technical differences between those, but just this idea that the physical world is all that there is has that killed the notion of the soul? I love this quote. This is from Mark Baker Stewart Getz, who did there's a great book, it's called The Soul Hypothesis. He said, hey, among people who think seriously about such things, there's simply no agreement about how one can explain human beings without a soul. Thus, it does not seem clear to us that there is truly a unified research program here under the name of materialism. The apparent consensus could be something of a mirage. That would be the consensus that we're just our physical bodies. With the only thing holding it together being a denial of the soul hypothesis, meaning that if you asked, hey, what's the most common view in scholarship about the human person? You might hear, hey, it's that we're material. They argue that when you probe deeper and really get into the specifics of the literature, that's a mirage. There is no consensus, actual consensus among scholars on this, especially scholars that are philosophers of science. It's the P in the PhD, right? So here's a question that I want us to start with and think about as we're going through all of what we talked tonight. You think about your worldview, right? That would be all of your ideas that you have about what the world is and what it's composed of. And here's a question I have. Does all of reality, everything that we know about, fit into your worldview, or are there massive explanatory gaps? I'm going to argue that if you're starting with the concept that the material world is all that there is, you're going to have ginormous gaps in your ability to explain that, if that is your worldview. Because I think there's a lot of reality that does not fit. I have an entire different talk that I've given here several times. I don't know if any of you have heard it, but it's really more on the philosophical argumentation, so it's less on the neuroscience and near-death experience. And basically, there's a number of things that are true of your conscious states. That would be like your conscious experience. You have things like beliefs, sensations, thoughts, memories. These are all things that you have in your conscious states. There are properties that your conscious states have that physical states not only, they cannot have. And so I have an entire separate talk on that. And the whole thesis of that talk is that conscious states and physical states are apples and oranges. They're not the same. And I don't care if we're talking about large physical states, like, I I usually bring Legos. I talk about Legos and like, hey, could you please arrange this pile of Legos to be true? That doesn't even make sense, right? But I have thoughts that are true and false, or beliefs that are true and false. So they're properties of my conscious states that aren't explainable in physical terms. So they're apples and oranges. Just some quick pieces of neuroscience that doesn't fit well with physicalism. This is Jeffrey Schwartz. He is the leading expert on if you ever heard of neuroplasticity. Basically, this is a way of literally rewiring your brain through forms of direct thinking. Okay, and he's a specialist in OCD, so obsessive compulsive disorder. He was actually a little anecdote. He was a consultant on the movie The Aviator with Leonardo DiCaprio because, remind me, who's the pilot, who's the famous guy, the aviator from that movie? What's it?
Howard Hughes.
Howard Hughes, there it is. Howard Hughes was an obsessive compulsive. And so Leonardo DiCaprio had to basically learn this behavior, and in the process, via neuroplasticity, gave himself a mild case of OCD, like of obsessive compulsive disorder, and had to seek treatment with Dr. Schwartz to unwind what he had done to his brain. It's actually pretty fascinating. Basically, it follows that if you're rewiring your brain with your thoughts, that something about your agency and your thinking is changing the physical makeup of your brain. The placebo effect is very unexplainable. This is Ann Harrington is a medical historian who talks about it. This is an interesting article. It was in an article like 13 things that do not make sense. Now this is a little bit dated. Of course, there's been more data since then, but the number one thing on this list was the placebo effect, and then its antecedent is the nocebo effect, or not antecedent, it's the wrong word. The antithesis is the nocebo effect. So placebo is you basically are, in particular, like in a drug trial, you have a drug that you're trying to test for and to see its efficacy. And so some people are getting the actual drug, and other people are getting like sugar pills, and they don't know if they're getting it. But there's wild things that happens in these drug trials where people's a guy went from like requiring total knee reconstruction to like taking some kind of pill to like not needing that surgery anymore. But he got the sugar pill. It's like, how did that happen? These weird stories like this. And so this is just a known, when we're doing drug testing, it's like a known effect that we have to account for. Basically, it's the psychology and the belief of a person does something directly to their physiology. And so the nocebo effect is the reverse. A common case is also like noted when you have two elderly people and they've been married for a long time, and one passes, and then shortly after that, the second one passes. There's sort of this will to not really live anymore, and so it's the reverse. So people have negative thoughts that, this is going to happen to me, I believe this thing, then it can also have physiological effects. Neurobiofeedback, I don't have time to really talk about this, but basically it uses neuroplasticity, but you can seek treatment and literally change your brain wiring through exercises of thinking. And it seems to follow from this, it just doesn't fit well that, hey, if the whole story of you is your brain and nervous system, if that is the entire story, then how is it that your brain and nervous system is changing itself? It seems to point to there's something over and above this simple biological substrate. This one's really fascinating. I'm not talking about this, but it's in line with our near-death experience. So terminal lucidity, when I first researched this, I'd literally never heard anyone talk about this before. But terminal lucidity is the complete or near complete restoration of cognitive functioning near or sometimes at the moment of death. So the kind of cognitive dysfunctioning that I'm talking about would be severe mental retardation, complete inability to even speak, going away the day or two before a patient died, and being able to completely to talk and to sing like a normal person. Other examples would be like Alzheimer's patients that haven't remembered who they are, or let alone who their family is, right before they die. Wake up from a nap, pick up the phone, remember their daughter's phone number, call her to tell her that they love her. Right, that's another example of like this phenomenon. So there's this big study that was done in 2014. There's been more that's happened since then, but this was like the first time this was done by like researchers, and this was published in journals. These are three people that have done research in this area. This was basically the conclusion of the study. Terminal lucidity appears to be a real phenomenon, but now I'm quoting from the study, but we do not know how often it happens. Prospective studies would be needed for that. Even severely demented patients may experience terminal lucidity to a degree which mimics full recovery of cognitive functioning. No definable causes for terminal lucidity were found, neither is the mechanism even understood. And so I'm pointing to this as, you know, if near death is that is the worst that these patients' brains and bodies are going to be, you know, their bodies are not getting better, their bodies are dying, okay? And so if the full story of who they are is their body and their brains and their nervous systems, this does not fit well, okay, with that. Remember my slide, does your worldview fit all the facts we know about reality? I don't think so. This is not a good fit. All right, so that was like 2 or 3 lectures, like in about 4 or 5 slides. Now let's get to the meat of it, so near-death experiences. So as the video indicated, there's a lot of like common, features of these near-death experiences. These guys here, these are some people that are actual doctors that are currently doing research in this area and publishing on it. Here's a good question for the Christians in this room, okay? So if you're a Christian, this is a theological question. This is not a question about the evidence or the science behind what we're going to talk about. But should our NDEs shape our theology? I argue no. I do not think that they should shape our theology. Why? A couple of reasons. As a Christian, we're going to derive our theology from God's word and not a subjective account, right? It's the reason why I'm not a Mormon. I don't believe that Joseph Smith, I don't believe his testimony. I could go into more if you want to talk to me about Mormonism later, I'll go into that more. But I don't derive my theology from that. I derive it from God's word. Here's another reason. Accounts differ in their details. Okay, they even saw that. You saw it in the trailer there too. Like some of these details are not exactly the same. Therefore, we can't always rely upon them to be theological details. This is probably the biggest one. Individuals have varying interpretations and beliefs that they form after an NDE. So they have an experience, and there are some similar threads across the experiences, but they definitely form different beliefs and interpretations about what those experiences were or what they meant. And so sometimes they're radically different and even contradict one another. Okay, so what do I think? If I don't think we should form our theology with NDEs, what do I think they prove then? I think this is probably a very good. I think this is basically a very good belief that we could form if these are true experiences that occur after the brain ceases to function, and typically the heart also you have full cardiac arrest. Then NDEs demonstrate that consciousness continues without the use of the brain and nervous system, and that people are having some kind or some form of spiritual experience. That, by spiritual, I mean non-physical. It's not extended in space or doesn't have weight. You're not measuring the soul. This is a spiritual experience. So I think this would point to good evidence that this is true. All right. So common features. You heard the lady. She said, "I've never been dead. I was alive, and then I was more alive." So that's a really common. Feature of these. They sometimes call it hyper states of consciousness. Like that's literally a quote that a researcher got. This was the most vivid experience I've ever had. One researcher said the guy slammed his hand on the table and said, "It was more real than this conversation I'm having with you right now." I don't know how to explain that to you, but every sense, like my senses, like my sight, my sound, the sound, everything that I was experiencing was more vivid than I had ever. It was almost like my experiences were dull when I was in my body, and then they were like fully live. That's another quote. "I was much more alive than I've ever been before. I've never been able to see in such detail. I saw such vivid colors I can't even describe them with words." These are excerpts from people. They often feature out-of-body experiences, like the trailer suggested. There is often a personal being of light. Certainly meeting dead relatives and friends are a common feature, but there's also this, most of the time, it is a loving being of light is what people experience. Some form of a life review of some kind. They describe it a little bit deep in different ways, but some kind of a life review is often described. Overwhelming feelings of love and joy. This is key, a boundary point. These are not dead experiences, these are near-death experiences, right? So there's always in these accounts, there's always like, okay, there was like a point at which I couldn't go past, right? I had to come back, I couldn't go past this point. That would actually, I think, be another reason for not shaping our theology based on these. These are not dead experiences, these are near-death experiences. So this, we're not getting the full story, we're getting a partial story if these are true. They're often life transformative, and it leads to complete personality changes. So things like jobs, personal interests, hobbies, like these are like radical life changing. And if you're doing just sociological data, you can actually look at, hey, what's the difference between somebody who has one of these NDEs and has a radical shift, and people that just crash on a cart or die and are resuscitated. That's a sociological analysis. You can see people that have had these experiences and others that have just died but not had these experiences and were resuscitated. And what seems to show, there seems to be data showing that this is transformative in some way over and above simply having a brush with death. All right, I really want to talk about evidential NDEs because it's one thing to just hear a story, okay? Like I think a common one that's pretty popular is the book Heaven is for Real, about the little boy who died. There was a movie that was made out of it. I'm not saying that little boy did not have an NDE, it just was not an evidential NDE, really. And what I mean by evidential is we have cardiac arrest, we have this person is clinically dead, they're having some kind of experience out of their body, they come back to their body, they're able to give evidence or have knowledge that they could not have possibly had because they were dead, or they were located in different places. Okay, so let me give, these are just some quick examples. Here's one thing I didn't realize, the amount of these are crazy. Like the literature, this is not like a few small stories. It's like almost overwhelming how many of these there are. So I like these because these are like really good examples of like, this isn't possible. Like this, if these really happen, these are, I mean, these happen, but these are point to just strong evidence. This isn't just an anecdotal story. So Katie was a young girl that drowned in her swimming pool at home. She was found dead in the pool. They took her to the hospital. On the way to the hospital, they got some of her bodily functionings going, but she never regained consciousness. But she was like full cardiac arrest, nothing happening for a long time before they got her into the ambulance. She was in a coma for like a long time, for like days at a time before she came to. She was able to recount to the doctors in the hospital what was happening when she arrived at the hospital and what they were trying to do to resuscitate her. She was able to describe the things they were doing to her body, the people, how many people were in the room, how many were man versus man or woman. She was able to also see what was happening at her house after her parents left. They stabilized her. She was like in a coma for days. Well, her parents, they had other kids, went home. She was able to recount what her mom was cooked for dinner at her house, what her dad was doing in the living room, and the toys that her brother was playing with while he was at home, and she was in a coma at the hospital. This is not possible if she's just her body. Her body is comatose in a hospital room, right? Another example here that I have is an elderly man that was, he was a homeless man that had died in a park, like a public park. And they took him to the hospital and they were trying to resuscitate him. He had dentures. They removed, he watched while they were trying to resuscitate him. He was out of his body. And they pulled his dentures out of his mouth and they stuck it on this crash cart in a particular drawer on this crash cart. And he noted in this out-of-body experience, like, I need those dentures. Right? And so he like like thought like I need to make sure if they bring me back that I get my dentures back. So like he's out for a couple days, he comes back and he's asking around, hey, where's the nurse that was working on me? And finally she walks in, he's like, you're the nurse, I need my dentures. And she's like, I don't know where your dentures are. He's like, yeah, you put it in the drawer on the cart. It's on the crash cart. And so they went and found the dentures in the crash cart. Okay? That one was published in a medical journal. This one was. Maria sees a red shoe. There was a woman who died in a hospital. She left her body and sort of floated out of the hospital room and sort of over the parking lot and was sort of floating away, but like seeing everything as this is happening. And as her body went through the building and she was over the parking lot, she turned around and she saw something red out of the corner of her eye, and she looked down, and on top of the building where her body was, she saw a red tennis shoe, random red tennis shoe. And it was just one, not two, one. And she thought, that's weird. Why is there a red tennis shoe on top of the hospital roof? And she was resuscitated and tried to explain, hey, I had this experience. I was out of my body, and they were like, just talking to her. She's like, well, I could prove it. On the roof, there's a single red tennis shoe. You can go up there. You can go get the red tennis shoe. And they did. They got the red tennis shoe from the roof. This is another one that is unbelievable, but also heartwarming. So a family was in a crash. It was a fiery crash. So the mother died instantaneously. There were two young boys in the car, and they took them to different hospitals. The ambulance came, that one went to one ICU unit and the other went to another. And the little boy was Peter that had this NDE. They were trying to resuscitate him, and of course they were badly burned. When they were able to get Peter to come back. They were able to resuscitate Peter, and although he was clearly in pain, he was also incredibly peaceful. And they thought, this is strange, like he should be screaming, like this is not normal. And he said, it's okay, Mommy and my brother, they're waiting for me. It's okay, they're waiting for me. And he died shortly after that. And when the doctor left, the phone rang at the nurse's station with the news that the other one had already died earlier at the other hospital. So it's just fascinating, just little things like that. So these are more like I said, these have evidential nature to them. They're not simply a story about, hey, I went to heaven and saw some things. These are other fascinating, and these are actual excerpts. The deaf hear in NDEs. And when I mean deaf from birth, like people that have had zero auditory sensations their entire life. They hear for the first time in an NDE. I was born profoundly deaf. All my relatives can hear, and the only way always they communicate was through sign language. Now I had direct communication with about 20 ancestors via some kind of telepathy, an overwhelming experience. The colorblind see color for the first time. I can distinguish the primary colors, so pastels are all the same to me. Suddenly I could see them, all kinds of different shades. Don't ask me to name them because I lack the necessary experience for that. Blind see, and by blind I mean blind from birth. Never seen anything before. I've never seen anything, no light, no shadows, no nothing. And in my dreams, I don't even have visual impressions. It's just taste, touch, sound, and smell, but no visual impressions of anything. In reference to her NDE, she stated it was incredible, really beautiful, and I'm overwhelmed by that experience because I couldn't really imagine what light was like. Pam Reynolds is probably, if you want hard, clinical, monitored data, Pam Reynolds is probably the best example that is unexplainable by any kind of material means. So Pam had a condition. It was a rare brain condition that had to do with arteries in her brain. And there was a doctor, Dr. Robert Spetzler, who had pioneered a really radical procedure to correct this, because it's one of those where you're basically going to have an aneurysm and just keel over and die, kind of a things if you don't repair this. And so Dr. Spetzer said, hey, good news, I think we could fix this. Bad news is we have to kill you first. And so the way that this operation works is you have to stop stop their heart. You have to drain all the blood out of the body. You have to perform the operation, pump all the blood back into the body, resuscitate the patient. That's how you have to do this, okay? Now, to make sure that they are like fully not there, they also have these special devices in their ear that are basically alternating click sounds like this, because they're monitoring, her entire brain is being monitored, because there has to be zero brain activity during this procedure. And the way they test for that is you have involuntary responses that happen when you hear a sound, whether you're conscious or not. And so they can measure the brain activity to make sure, hey, is Pam is there any brain activity happening here? Of course, we can also measure like the electrical activity too. Is there anything going on here? So she's hooked up to every sensor that we could possibly put on her to make sure she is dead. She cannot be alive during this. Her heart cannot be pumping. She can have no blood in her body. She can have no brain activity. Pam had a radical NDE during this time. She'd never been to the hospital where the operation was performed. She'd never seen one of these operations before. She was able to describe in detail exactly what was happening in the operating room. She was able to describe the tools that Dr. Spetzer was using to do the procedure. She heard there was a problem because when they were doing something with her IV, she had an IV problem in her leg or something. It was either an IV or they're trying to do something with her artery in her leg. There's a problem on one side, and the nurse said, hey, I've got a problem. We got to go switch this over to the left leg. She watched that entire conversation. She was able to recount, hey, I heard you. You had a problem on my right leg. You had to put it over on my left leg. So it doesn't get, in terms of monitoring someone to make sure they are dead, and this is not just some kind of hallucination of some kind, it doesn't get much better than Pam Reynolds' NDE. So that's a fascinating one. So this is my question back to you. What's your worldview? Does it fit? Does some of the things that we've talked about, can you account for them in your worldview? I think that if your worldview is physicalism, you're going to have trouble. So these are things that we've talked about so far, and of course a lot of these I didn't dive deep into because I wanted to leave room for questions and all that. But hey, these are all things that don't fit well. But if we have a soul, if there's something about us that's immaterial, this fits really nicely. I don't think physicalism fits everything. I think it's like this lady trying to pack her suitcase. Physicalism is a suitcase and reality is all the clothes. There's stuff that fits nicely in the suitcase. It's very explainable by physicalism. But there's a whole lot about reality that doesn't fit in the suitcase, right? I love this. I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. This is Jesus. So I love, Dallas Willard was a great philosopher, theologian, and he had a line that I like to quote. He said, "You are an eternal being. You couldn't cease to exist if you tried to." I love that. I also love what D.L. Moody said. He said, "Someday you're going to read in the papers, D.L. Moody of East Northfield is dead. Don't you believe a word of it. At that moment, I shall be more alive than I am now." All right, that's what I got for you guys. I went quick. So, happy to answer any questions. Happy to go over any of the philosophical evidence or the neuroscience stuff that I just blew through really quickly. But I told Alan I couldn't not mention that stuff. So,
why do you think most people don't have NDEs after they die, or that have a near-death experience?
Yeah,
they don't have like a spiritual.
Why do I think?
Experience? Yeah.
I don't have an answer for that question, but you're right that is an interesting phenomenon. There are people that die and get resuscitated, and they don't seem. In fact, there was studies done on that exact thing because they wanted to see like if people. Basically, they told people like if you were gonna don't tell us whether or not you had one, just tell us what you think happened. And most of the time, people that didn't have one, they sort of just made up stuff that sounded like, something they had seen in a movie somewhere or on a TV show, like it just didn't really fit like with the medical science. There are some NDEs that, in fact, was it Parnia? I can't remember if it's Sam Parnia or Pim Lama. One of those two said that some of these resuscitation accounts are so detailed they could be used to train medical professionals on how to perform resuscitations. Like some of them are that detailed. So inaccurate. So I don't know the answer to that. I don't know why it is, but it's true. Not everyone has these experiences. Some of them are also, a lot of them are not evidential in nature too. That's the other thing. What I really focus on is the ones that seem to have evidence to them that are more than a simple story. So, yeah.
One skeptical response that I've seen people have towards NDEs like this is the argument that, oh, they didn't really have a near-death experience, they were just more aware than the doctors thought they were. In the case of the woman who had no brain activity, that seems very unlikely, but for Maria, who saw the red shoe, she hadn't been like flown into the hospital or anything, had she? There wasn't any way that she...
I don't remember all the details, but if someone says that, that just tells me they are not at all familiar with the literature. All right, they're just simply not familiar with it. That's an opinion. Like I would probably say, hey, how did you come to that conclusion? Because I guarantee you they didn't come to that conclusion by reading the literature.
I'm going to be honest, I skimmed the Wikipedia page for Maria during the talk, and that was like their conclusion for it, so I just kind of wanted to get your opinion.
Yeah, I don't remember all the details of that particular one, so, but yeah.
But either way, your studies have shown that.
I mean, there are definitely some experiences that are happening where the person is, so, I mean, like if Maria had been flown into the hospital, let's say, like, okay, now you're gonna have to show that she was physically able to, she was conscious and physically able to see the roof of the hospital. Like, she was, and perhaps that's the case. I don't know the specific details of that.
All right.
But there are, I mean, some of these are these are just not possible for like Katie, like the little girl. It's just not possible that she'd be able to recount what she did. Of course, Pam Reynolds, like you said, not possible. So, yeah, I mean, definitely lots of skeptics, and I'm not saying that every single case is like evidentially has the same evidential weight as another, right? But there's a preponderance of these. I'd say most of them are sort of just anecdotal. They're more like stories. Like I left my body, I saw my grandpa, I met with Jesus. Like that's all fine and dandy. Oh, one thing I didn't mention that just reminded me when I said met with Jesus. So another fascinating thing that is a common thread that I don't think I had on the slide is that these also seem to these common similarities seem to cross over not just demographic of like young, old, but they also like socioeconomic boundaries they cross, as well as cultural boundaries. So you're having people in like, remote villages recounting very similar things to somebody in New York City. Like it's very, like it's not the same across religion. Like it seems to be that these common threads seem to happen regardless of what people's beliefs are. In fact, a lot of them happen to people that don't believe at all. There was a fascinating one with, it was a philosopher, and I'm blanking on the name. It wasn't Bertrand Russell, but it's another famous atheist philosopher. He had an NDE, and he said, I was confronted with a red being of light and all I knew is that it was responsible for the governance of the universe. Like that was the, that was his experience. And so in his example, like he is, sort of like conditioned both in his, his philosophy and his beliefs to not expect anything on the other side. So this is an irrespective of persons. This happens to people. So.
I was wondering, on the table that you presented, the idea of qualia, the non-physical attribute of thinking, as an extension of that, that's from epiphenomenal qualia by Frank Jackson.
Qualia is it's not about necessarily epiphenomenalism is an attempt to explain qualia. The qualia is that
derived from before that.
Yeah, qualia is a fancy word for saying what something is like. So what, like, if you say, hey, I know what, looking at the color red, I know what that's like. Or
Hexaid or something?
Say again?
The hexaid or something?
I'm sorry.
The hexaid, it's like.
Yeah, it's kind of, I don't know, like, I like to just say it, the what it's like nature, like I know what it's like to taste a strawberry, right? There's an actual texture, taste, you know, an experiential nature of something. And so that is, philosophers call that qualia. Epiphenomenalism is a fancy word for saying that somehow something non-physical squirts out of material stuff when it gets combined in complicated ways. Like that's basically what that is. It's a form of property dualism. So it's not that there are two separate substances. You've got physical stuff and somehow a phenomenon of some kind squirts out of physical stuff. And I have an entire lecture on why I think that fails and why that doesn't work, but it doesn't explain qualia. It's just a way of trying to account for it. But it's still a non-physical thing. I think epiphenomenalism in general is like, okay, but if you still have to explain how the existence of something non-physical here. And so this is why David Chalmers calls this the hard problem of consciousness. You may have heard that term before, where the hard problem, by most philosophers, they think it's not a hard problem, it's like an unsolvable problem, really. And so there's even just a recent debate that happened just this year that I listened to between Sean Carroll, who's a physicalist, he's a physicist, right? Sean Carroll,
Right.
Or cosmologist, I can't remember
Yeah.
what he is. He's certainly a physicalist, and yeah, it was fascinating to listen to that debate. He wanted to argue that all of consciousness could be explained in physical terms, and he just, did not do that.
No one knows how that would happen.
Yeah.
You figured they stopped trying after a while, but I wanted to ask, what's the most compelling argument you have heard for physicalism?
Oh, for physicalism?
Yeah, I would want to.
Good question. The most compelling argument, I think probably it is, and this was basically his argument in the debate, is, hey, this really, like, what we know about the physical universe really works. Like, it works well. Like, we've solved a lot of problems, and with this theory, and so, you know, we're starting with the axioms that physical matter is all there is. There's been a lot of great science that's come out of that, and a lot of good has come from that, and it's solid, and we know it to a degree. I think you get to certain places, and you probe deep enough, we don't know. We don't. There's a lot of problems in the philosophy of science that are unanswered. But I think the best argument is, hey, this has worked really well. So unless you've got really strong reasons for me to throw this out of the window, I'm not going to do it. I think that's probably the best argument for physicalism. I don't know. Would you agree?
It seems like they overemphasize, though, that they're assuming all these physicists or scientists that have made scientific progress are thinking like they are as a naturalist, whereas really a lot of the pioneers were theists, right?
Well, that's true.
And so they weren't necessarily motivated by naturalism to make progress in science. So it's a little bit misleading to just say that you take on that philosophy and it leads to truth.
I agree with that.
Fully, anyway, but.
Yeah, I think what they would say is like the study of physical things is really established and has solved a lot of problems. And so because that tool works well, that is the only tool in the game.
And they love to point to a case where maybe in the past somebody thought lightning was caused by the gods or thunder or whatever, right? They love to speak to that scenario, even though it's certainly not the case that Judaism or Christianity really had that view necessarily. So,
of course, there's a number of things that, you know, science has to assume that, you know, that isn't demonstrated by empirical evidence, right? And so, you know, but it's a powerful tool. So I want to say as a theist, like, of course it is, you know, like it's the way God created the universe. So it's a great tool.
There's a rational mind behind it.
I'm not anti-science. I'm not, you know, I'm not anti-brain science or neuroscience at all. It's fascinating to me. There's like probably 5 or 6 different views of the human person, including the one that I hold, that we have a soul, that's the data is empirically equivalent. In fact, the guy that was arguing in the debate for the other side was saying, hey, he was actually a panpsychist, I don't want to get into that, but you get panpsychism, property dualism or epiphenomenalism, like what you're talking about, substance dualism, which is where I stand, physicalism. All of these different views of the human person are empirically equivalent when you look at the data of neuroscience, meaning like neuroscience doesn't debunk any of these. They're all, so really, actually neuroscience, when it comes to philosophy, this is actually a problem of philosophy of mind, not of neuroscience, which is, neuroscience is fascinating and important, and it does have something to say about the topic, but it's literally like the wrong tool. It's apples and oranges.
It's underdetermined, you could say,
Yeah.
Has anybody drawn a relationship between psychedelic substance use and the experiences that you're describing? Because there are striking similarities in the self-reports of people who have gone through those experiences.
Yeah, that's a common skeptical option on the table, would be the brain is doing something like in its last fleeting fights for life is some kind of, DMT situation is happening in the brain, or some kind of hallucination is happening in the brain. Another common objection or hypothesis is like basically apoxia or hypoxia, of like, it's something's happening in the brain because it's losing oxygen, things like that, or blood. And so, these are all possible hypotheses. And so we have to study, like, are they explanatory power? Do they have the explanatory power to handle the data? And I'm going to argue no, they do not have the explanatory power. Now, could they explain some of the data? Sure, and maybe even some of the cases and some of the experiences, possibly. But all of the data, I don't think so. I don't think you have enough here, especially the ones that are evidential in nature, where it's not simply an experience, it is actual knowledge of the world when the person is clinically dead. And sometimes spatially located in somewhere other than where they are. Like it's not from the hospital, it's from like, a county over or something. Those kinds of things are not explainable, I don't think, by hallucination. Now you can say, well, I don't know, blind hog finds an acorn now and again, as they say, like maybe they just happen to guess the right details or happen to have the right hallucination to align with the facts of what's happening in the real world. Again, now we're getting into sort of epistemology and what a justified belief would be, and what counts as knowledge, and and what is good evidence, and so yeah. But you're right, that is one, that and a couple other things are common. I would say they're not actual evidence that they're not actual evidence that this is what's happened in a particular case. It's rather just one of a list of possibilities of maybe this has some explanatory power in a particular case. So that's what I think of that. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the split brain phenomenon? Does that sort of debunk consciousness, mind?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's trying to think about how deep to go. That's a rabbit hole. So there are different cases, and different cases of this present differently. So it's not as if, hey, the one split brain, like that phenomenon is the same across all the different cases. So that's why it's sort of a complicated answer. So what do I think about it? I think that just because things can happen to my brain that affect my conscious experience, like if I go drink too much booze tonight, I'm going to affect my conscious experience, right? Or if you stick a rod in my head, I'm not going to, I might lose motor functioning, or, there's a lot of things you could do to my body that would change my conscious experiences. But it doesn't follow that because you affect basically it's the difference between identity and correlation. So it doesn't prove that I am my brain, because, like I said, it's empirically equivalent with the idea that I'm impaired because you've damaged my body and my soul can't operate correctly now.
Or were you thinking, Ashton, possibly of like the the surgeries they do on the severe epileptics,
Yeah.
where they split the brain,
Yeah, that's the
Yeah,
corpus
it's like
callosum. It's
two
separate.
Yeah.
different people living in the same body, or two minds.
more so than some of the injury type cases, where there they still seem to be one person.
Yeah, I mean, you certainly also have, cases of, multiple personality disorders and things like that, right? So I would just say that what we have here is we have the brain has been damaged or affected in some particular way, and that is impairing their soul's ability to, to operate normally. It's like sort of like the example that philosophers give for this would be like, imagine that I'm in a car, and when I'm in the car and the car's functioning normally, I can turn right, I can turn left. Let's say I run over a giant rock in the road and something happens and the car, I can't turn the wheel to the left and I can only now make right turns, or I'm only going in circles. Because the car was damaged doesn't prove that I'm the car, right? It just proves that the car is impaired and now I can't do what I need to do while I'm in the car. And so that's why it doesn't necessarily disprove the fact that there could be a soul here. It just shows that when you, and so, we expect on my view, you expected that to happen, that you're going to impair the soul's ability to operate normally, or to have even differing experiences, right? The other thing too is like some of the evidence we talked about, like neurobiofeedback, neuroplasticity, some of these things, it seems like the correlation works in the other direction as well. Like we can also change, like we can physically change the brain with directed thoughts. Like, so it's not just that the brain can affect or impair the soul, it's the other way around can happen too. So, yeah.
What do you think those kind of, when they do split the brain, isn't it surprising though that the patients don't report a bigger change for most of the cases?
There's some fascinating conditions where people have literally have a fraction of the normal brain tissue of a normal person, but they have the same normal conscious experience as normal people too. I forgot the name of that condition.
Yeah.
But it's like a fraction of the brain tissue. It's something like a drastic amount, like a fourth of the amount or something. And they still have a normal human experience from a conscious standpoint of that. And it's hard to explain. Like, okay, and I do think that this is where neuroscience shines. Like, this is where we need to study the brain more, and we need to understand how the brain works. I'm not arguing that we shouldn't do that, or that isn't helpful or can't tell us something about who we are. I think it's just studying our body. I don't think it's studying the spiritual part of us. Yeah.
When it comes to a person having less brain tissue, can't that be explained by neuroplasticity and the body's ability to adapt to those changes?
Yeah, perhaps. I don't know how that works. It seems to be I'm not an expert on that particular condition, but it doesn't seem to fit. Like, you would think that, okay, if someone has like a much smaller amount of brain tissue and like they're seem to have I guess an abnormal, or actually reminded, have you guys ever seen Young Frankenstein? It's an old classic, but he goes and he steals the wrong brain. Anyway, it's a great movie. Go check it out. Abby Normal. Yeah, what was her name? Abby Normal. It's not the right brain. Anyway, they seem to have this abnormal brain, and not enough tissue, but yet they seem to still be having very similar conscious experience as the rest of us, and so that doesn't. Again, I'd say that doesn't seem to fit well with the concept that we are the total story of us is our brain and our nervous system and our body. Like, it seems to be like, okay, there's something more going on here. So, yeah.
So, like, with consciousness, what do you make of the theory that consciousness is an emergent phenomenon? Because we can observe like school of fish or colonies of ants that act as a single unit, like a hive mind.
Yeah.
So what do you make of the theory that consciousness arises in the brain because of brain cells working together to produce a single intelligence? Yeah,
so that goes along with the question she asked earlier about epiphenomenalism. That basically is the view that consciousness is an emergent property. And I said sometimes it's called property dualism because it's an emergent property from physical matter. I like to say that saying that consciousness is emergent is a name for the problem, not a solution for the problem. Like, the problem we're trying to explain is, how do we get non-physical things from physical stuff? The emergent property is literally saying, like, hey, somehow, boop, something non-physical. where the heck did that come from? That's, just putting a name on it doesn't solve the problem, it just labels it something. So you also have problems with that view, with the, what's called the continued agency or continued personhood through time. Because if my consciousness is dependent on certain arrangements of matter in my body, in my brain, the problem is that the guy that you are looking at is literally a different physical object than the guy that existed when I was your age, right? You're probably what, early 20s or something, right? So like when I was your age, literally I was a different physical, I had all the matter that makes up my body now is different than the matter that existed when I was your age. And so how am I the same person if my consciousness is emergent on physical matter? I'm not, I'm something different, but yet I have the same, I have the same memories, I have the same, many of the same thoughts, many different thoughts and different beliefs that have changed over time. But even when I say, hey, I've changed over time, notice the operative word is the I have changed over time. I'm not saying I was a different person. I'm saying I was the same person, but have changed and adapted in different ways. And so that continuation of, the other thing that you have is like, what do you do with moral agency if we're not the same people from one moment to the next? Like how does our entire court system even make sense? I mean, could the murderer if you committed a murder 20 years ago and like, why are we trying this person now? It's a different person, right? So there's a bunch of problems that fall out of property dualism or epiphenomenalism, where the view is that the consciousness is simply an emergent property on physical matter. I don't think it works. I think some form of substance dualism. I think panpsychism is interesting. This is the view that all matter has some kind of non-physical property to it that it's actually the best view for if you want Toy Story to be real, because at some level the plastic toy has consciousness that it's not as sophisticated as mine, but on panpsychism there's some level of consciousness there. What's that?
Like Donald Hopkins, the neuroscientist?
I don't know him. Is he a panpsychist?
I think so.
Yeah, it's really popular.
It's
very popular because consciousness is not explainable in physical terms. So it's like, okay, maybe we got it wrong. Maybe it wasn't in the beginning were the particles. Maybe it was in the beginning were the consciousness parts of some kind. And somehow physical stuff came out of the consciousness stuff. I want to say, hey, you're almost there. You're almost there.
God.
In the beginning was the word, was the Laros. And so you're almost there. You're close. Yeah.
I was going to just make one more quick comment about your question, because I mean it is a good one. It's a common one. So you can, I think, you can compare the behavior of individual organisms versus the colony or hive, and just say, well, it's a small extrapolation, right? Like the fish are swimming. People have modeled it, and you can write programs. Sometimes they use them for drones and stuff. Even you're still dealing with the same kind of phenomenon, whereas the difference between, and you could probably expound on this better, but the nature of the properties being so different is what is, you can't extrapolate to something from something physical to something that has all these non-physical properties, like on Beau's chart, by just saying it, it's more of the same. It seems to be this quantum leap. And so saying it's an emergent property, well, it's a different kind of property. How do you know it's emergent from physical causes if it doesn't seem physical?
Because it's immaterial.
Yeah,
So
correlation and identity.
Say again?
Like what you said, correlation, identity, there's a correlation there, but
yeah, there's a correlation, but yeah, so that's my view. So as a substance dualist, I want to say, hey, we have a soul. Or a better way of saying it is, I am a soul and I have a body. I like that. I like that a little bit better, because I think my body is part of my soul. I think we're on the Christian view. We're not dualist in the Platonic sense of like physical matter and spiritual matter are these two separate categories, and spiritual matter is better than physical matter. No, I think on Christian theism, biblical worldview, God has created us as embodied beings. In fact, Paul says to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord, but he calls it kind of like a nakedness, like it's like an unnatural state to be in that state, like what we're meant to be embodied. And if we read our not to dive into eschatology, but basically the end of the story is there will be a new heavens and a new earth, and so we will be embodied again. If you believe, if you're a Christian theist that believes in the Bible, that is the end of the story. Cool. You guys a lot, so I'm gonna jump up here.
Am I correct in saying that you're you were saying that people's near-death experiences didn't always, or they didn't align with their worldviews?
Yes, that's really common.
Generally not. So,
Yeah.
I'm wondering how that just squares with, I have read Heaven is for Real and 90 Minutes in Heaven, and now I recognize that, they kind of contradict themselves in some ways. So I'm curious how you square those kinds of experiences with the experiences that are more evidential.
Yeah.
I guess that was the extent of my question.
Well, so the evidential ones that I mentioned, what I want to try to show there is that, remember my sort of like humble hypothesis here, like, I don't think these are shaping our theology, but if they are heretical, that is, they're true experiences that are backed by some kind of evidence here, that we can say, okay, hey, that's best explained by this person not being in their body. Okay. If that's the case, well, then I think probably maximally what we can infer from that is that consciousness seems to extend without the use of the body, and that some kind of spiritual experience is possible after death. But I don't listen or like read a near-death experience and then I say, okay, this is now what I believe what's going to happen when I die. Okay, the reason why I don't is because these experiences, number one, they're not dead experiences. Like I said, these are near-death experiences, so I don't know what the final story is going to be. Number two, they differ a lot of times in their details. So some people have one kind of an experience, other people have other kinds of experiences, and sometimes they're like really kind of, back to his thing back here, it's psychedelic in nature. Like, I rode on the back of a butterfly through a field of, flower. Like, it's like, okay, this sounds like an acid trip or something. And sometimes they're like, like the documentary shows, they're hellish experiences. Like, there are a lot of different kinds of these experiences, but there are also very common themes. They're not 100% all the time, but these themes, like I said, these themes transcend a lot of different boundaries of religion, philosophy, like culture. You have somebody in a jungle and village somewhere having a similar experience, like I said, to someone that's in New York City. Like, you would think that these, if they were sort of being generated by preconceived and culturated ideas, they would not have the same common threads, right? So, and that would include people that might be full-on atheists, and even like academics and scholars. Evan Alexander is an example of someone who was not just a neuroscientist, but an atheist neuroscientist that had a near-death experience. And
was it A.J. Ayers that you were trying to
A.J. Ayers, thank you. That was the philosopher. That was in the back. I couldn't remember his name. So he had a near-death experience. He was a really prominent modernist.
He wrote anti-theist works. I mean, he was pretty dedicated.
Yeah, it wasn't Bertrand Russell, but it's like pretty close.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, I guess to sum it up, it's like, how do I square it? I not that I don't give any credence to, say, like heaven is for real kind of a story. I think that's interesting. I take it into my total. It fits in my suitcase of what I believe. The other thing too to remember is that these are people's interpretations of their experiences, right? So they come away with that's very different than saying, hey, this is true for everybody, like this is a, gospel truth for everybody. It's like, no, I had this experience and I came back and it's all about love. Like, okay. Then the other person's like, no, I saw Jesus and it's all about him. And then other people are like, I went to hell and I called out to Jesus and he rescued me from hell. Like there's those kinds of, things too. But then there's also like, hey, I became one with, love, and like that's very pantheistic, interpretation of. So these are all interpretations. So while the experiences, I think, that are, especially the ones that are evidential, that typically are more of the out-of-body kind, are, sometimes they're not though. Sometimes they died, they like went and they had a conversation with somebody and they came back with information from that other person on the other side. And it's not like, hey, I saw a red shoe. It's like, hey, this person told me that, this had happened in my family, and I came back and confronted my parents and they said, yes, that did happen, like things like that. So there's a lot of these that are more evidential in nature. So I don't think they should shape our theology, but I think they fit very comfortably in a Christian worldview. I think they do not fit in a physicalist worldview. Thanks, guys.
Alrighty, so looks like we're finishing up pretty early today.
That's good. We should do
12
that
minutes.
sometimes. I appreciate that. People get busy.
I think tonight, for anyone wanting to come to the dinner afterward, I think we're going to probably go to Sonic. That's like the one place on the normal list that we haven't been to, and it's nice weather finally. So, yay! So yeah, so
Be outside without boiling.
yay!
Yes.
And that is the Sonic. Oh gosh. Okay, we got this stuff wrong last time. It is.
I am going to put the address of
Yes.
Sonic into Discord.
I'm not even gonna say anything. Just look at the address. It's very
Does everyone
misleading.
on Discord, does anybody need that info to get on Discord? Maybe we could write that on the
Point
board.
and Maple Shade, is that anything else?
You guys should go see the movie coming out as a group too.
Was it
Oh,
October
Actually, yeah,
27th?
that sounds pretty
Yeah.
good.